Hello. Alright, I'm going to read 1 John chapter 2, starting at verse 13. I have written unto you, fathers, because ye have known that this is from the beginning. I have written unto you, young men, because ye have overcome the wicked one. I write unto you, little children, because ye have known the Father. I have written unto you, fathers, because ye have known him that is from the beginning. I have written unto you, young men, because ye are strong, and the word of God abideth in you, and ye have overcome the wicked one. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. Little children, it is the last time, and ye have heard that Antichrist shall come. Even now are there many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. Bible smack. Alright, so today I wanted to kind of, I don't know if it's a response, just kind of retort a little bit and then kind of go on my own 2 cents. But an issue dealing with a new ministry called, what was it called? Sunday Teas? I think that's what it is. Basically, this was a ministry that was endorsed by Lifeway, and it would sell their stuff. And Sunday Teas is this super youth ministry thing. And I think that, like, apparently it's done a devotion with a Gen Z translation. I don't think it's a real translation. I think it's just a group of passages that they made for a devotion. And basically, there's a lot of satire, and some of the, conservatives, usually Reformed or something, a lot of those guys are starting to bark about it. Now, the reason why I find that they're barking about it is because it gives them a chance to act as if they're not the problem. This is all the fruits of their spirit, okay? But once again, we'll have to deal that out a little bit. So basically, they go through like John chapter 1, and they really screw up by using all this hip language. They screw up the doctrine of the Trinity, kind of turn into modalism or something like that. Even James White apparently was mad about that. And what I found is stupid is that they've had a translation that they could really have complained about. And some of them whined about, but they didn't really hit it very hard, and that was the Message. The Message also has lots of problems with the Trinity, if you really look at its key passages. I mean, a lot of stuff that just looks very similar to New World Translation, only sloppier. And so when the Gen Z translation is just, I don't know, like more lingo-ish. I mean, it's kind of contemporary Ebonics, I guess. I know. You got young folk who might watch this and they don't know what Ebonics is, right? But that was a fake language that, they made up for the inner city. And, basically they were making more slang. And so once they made more slang, they said, oh, it's part of their culture. They're a new African culture. And, they don't speak English. They speak Ebonics. They might as well be speaking Klingon, right? So once they kind of got the system down, this guy's coming out, and I don't know if he's really endorsing what he says. I think it might be more like satire and comedy. So he's really spoofing or trolling youth people. And youth ministers, I think a lot of them find it funny and stuff. But for the purpose of ministry, it was pretty irrelevant, very offensive, and, some things heretical, something, this and that, and really just in the wrong place. There are things I feel free joking around about in front of adults that I might not say in front of a child or, a group of older people or whatever. Okay, so there is a time and the place and all that kind of stuff. But Lifeway, you have to understand the history of the store. This used to be the Baptist Sunday School materials. That's kind of basically the name they had. Because they were a part of the Southern Baptist denomination. Okay, that's what they were. They were not just a business. And now it's okay. We'll just let them be just a business. And then they decided to be not quite as much a business. Now they're just a warehouse. They've shut down their stores. And when their stores were open, it was kind of freaky. You saw a lot of memorabilia that you would use as a Catholic. Nothing to do with Southern Baptist beliefs or anything like that. And lots of non-Southern Baptist articles, authors, yada yada. So, basically, Lifeway has taken this guy's stuff down and took his book out of their circulation. And then he kind of did a spoof on it or something, calling a bunch of Karens or something. Now, let me kind of give a little bit of my background. Because honestly, my point, at this point, I kind of believe that youth ministry is, by design, an attack on specifically conservative, maybe conservative Protestant churches. And it's designed that way. If you were looking out onto your front yard and you saw a big cement block, and fused onto that block was a giant cannon that's aimed at your house. Doesn't matter what people do on the cannon. The only purpose for that, the only way that cannon has any use, is to destroy your house. And youth ministry was designed to contradict, if not take over or destroy, regular Christian churches. And that started probably around the late 60s and eventually branched its way out. And think about the youth ministry narrative. The old crusty church, they don't accept me, they don't like me, they're evil, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that is, there is a problem. And youth ministry is going to solve the problem. The message of youth ministry to the churches was, you are failures, and you don't understand, and you don't love, and you don't care. Okay. Now, let me just say this. My brother is working for an organization called Youth for Christ. My grandparents once helped out with that ministry, and one of the most famous people associated with it was Billy Graham. And my grandparents met each other and eventually got married when they met each other at a Youth for Christ thing. Okay. So, working with youth is not unfamiliar territory. And on top of that, now we have a couple generations. Okay, we have grandparents who were involved in the youth ministry. And yet, they're still the enemy. Alright? It's like the old hippie thing. Never trust anybody over 30. You know, when a youth minister gets old, then they need to go and pastor. And sometimes it's not that the youth can't do anything good with the system. It's not that you can't find anything of use, but that it's not completely useful. Okay, you can do good things with a bad system, but that is a bad system. Because how can you believe and propagate what the church teaches and say that the church is the problem? You know, at some point, you say, I love you, that's why I want to change you. So it is kind of a Trojan horse, okay? And I probably started doing stuff with youth ministries, let's say I was about 12 or 13. Probably more like 13, but like on the edge of 12. And there was a very conservative church I was attending, probably like Baptist / Reformed. And, they were kind of tightly wound. And, some of these people were not quite, they were still conservatives themselves, the youth ministry groups. And the youth minister himself would later become a pastor. But at that time, he was the youth minister. And then he would become very influential in the local Baptist Association in our city. And then he died of cancer. But basically, so it started out, and they taught me conservative things. And I was unaware of many of those things because I was young and my parents weren't going to get that deep into it with me. And they had kind of hit a backslidden state as I was going from childhood to preteen. They kind of hit a backslidden state until I was well into high school. But I had a praying grandmother. Therefore, I get, through the power of the Holy Spirit, I get my friends to invite me to the church, and then all of a sudden I'm going to church. Well, at that point, there was still like a contradiction, you had this conservatism, but, it's like, well, we're going to do something fun, but, it's like we're doing this, but we're disgusted to be doing it. And I'm not saying that they had the perfect methods, that the older therefore was better, or that tradition therefore better. But there's a lot more interwoven with this, okay? And so, as I said, youth is by nature an alien entity, and therefore they butt heads. And, you end up with, like, the youth guy who ends up running the sound and the lights and the snicker and whatever. And basically, I didn't have political protection because my family wasn't going. If you're so-and-so's kid, you have a little bit more protection. But if you're just a youth, then it's kind of like, well. So basically, I had a bad situation with a family that was taking me, and it just totally just blew things up. And I didn't go there after that. Then I went to another church, and they had a bigger youth ministry. And the youth minister was good looking, and he was cool. And, I thought, wow, this guy's cool for Jesus. And, they'll sing some of these very, quasi-charismatic, but not like old Pentecostal, something kind of spiritualized and hippie-ish. And basically, they had some rituals. And of course, the big thing is like, youth ministry in the 90s was about, you cannot have sex till you get married. That was like 90% of it. Oh, here's some gospel stuff, but it's like, don't have sex before you're married. Don't! And I remember I'm like at the first church, and I'm like, but what if it's with your girlfriend? And everybody's like, no! And then like 10 years after that, I'm a youth minister, and I found a kid who had a lot of problems, and we got him going to church and talked to him about the gospel, got him saved, got him baptized, and everything like that. And then one day in the youth group, he was also a Matthew, and he said, but what if it's with your girlfriend? No! So that was kind of like the gist. But this other one, the second one, it took 9 weeks before anybody even greeted me. And I know I'm friends on Facebook with the girl who did. And I'm really like, I was really close friends with her husband. But they're kind of like, they live kind of the way, they're doing their own thing. So, yeah. It is what it is. But basically, I just couldn't really get too deep with God on that. There was like some trips and retreats, and you can kind of get your God time there, but I just made a decision. I was having trouble with all this stuff, and I was like, look, God, I'm going to do, the requirements, okay, and I'm going to try not to do these big bad things, but I'm just going to focus on living my life. So I just got into sports, and I got very secular. But I wouldn't do the drugs and drink and do smoking or whatever. Cuss like a sailor, to be honest with you. But I would, not do these certain bad things. So, and no, I waited for marriage. So, But basically, it wasn't something that really sparked some power. And then there was like a big revival. And when we had the revival, the youth ministry was very popular. There's a new youth minister. My feelings about it, I'm not certain, because now I've seen some of these youth 10, 15 years later. I think the church was at a time of revival. I was personally at a place of revival. Everything was in a positive place. Revival had started, around in America, it really kind of started around like Washington, D.C. when they had the Stand in the Gap rally and Promise Keepers and stuff. But anyhow, 9/11 happens, and then you have a huge boost. So all of a sudden now everybody's in the state of revival. Everything's going big. And Christianity would get big and get polluted. It's the way it usually goes. But basically, while that's going on, I think that the system that this church was at, where the next youth minister I became a youth leader at, okay? And so I would do all sorts of activities with them and stuff. And I think that they were more easygoing than that first youth ministry. They were more spiritual than the second one. But I don't think that they had a good grounding. And now, those millennials grew up, and I don't care for them. What can I say? Not all of them, but, there's a lot of them that I've seen in the butted heads, and they're just doing things that I think are just, quite frankly, ungodly, and they think that they're good Christians and everything's fine. So, nevertheless, a lot of the principles of the culture just are totally abandoned now. And so then, I became a youth minister after I volunteered with that megachurch youth ministry. I had also acquired a minors in youth, or I think, what was it? Proficiency. They called it Proficiency Youth Ministry. I took 5 youth ministry courses. The guy who ran the program used to be the youth minister for Jerry Falwell's church. Trying to remember the name of that one. Is it Thomas Road Baptist Church? Okay. Well, anyhow, so, I got deep into the youth ministry, and the youth ministers were not often theologically deep. If they got deep, it would be going along with the doctrine of the school. And, so it's like, you're either not theological or you are. And if you are, then you do whatever they tell you. Because you get easily indoctrinated is the problem. The youth ministry guys would be playing video games all the time in the Bible college dorms. So you're either going to study the recommended theology, or you're going to be over in this corner. Okay. So basically, there was this, Paul was a Roman to the Romans, he was a Jew to the Jews, so we have to adapt to the culture. And they had a great motto, and I've forgot it. To reach the culture, But anyway, it was completely under the system of Rick Warren and purpose-driven. And Rick Warren was one of these guys who marketed himself to conservatives, but a lot of his internal stuff was liberal. And I didn't figure that out until I was working on my master's degree at a place that was not as conservative. So, once I started kind of realizing, hold on, all these liberals are going with Rick Warren, I was like, something might not be right with Rick. Okay? But how could that be? Because of the other conservative place. Well, this is the thing, it all got infiltrated. Alright? The purpose-driven movement and the youth ministry and the megachurch ministry, it all really starts off with this positive thinking philosophy that merges psychology with Christianity, and also kind of gets New Age and shamanism and all sorts of wild things, okay, and just, regurgitates it all into our current culture. And the problem is that youth ministry overemphasizes, and I'm talking about the good Christian ones, okay? But the youth ministry overemphasizes the role of the culture. We need to know the culture in order to communicate with it. But we need the culture to change. At a minimum, to be accepting our existence. How can you be a missionary if no one accepts your existence? You got to get in with somebody, okay? Even if you're just getting in I'm sneaking over somebody's yard. Okay, well, somehow you got to know them, love them, and, work with them. So, there are cultural things that you have to do. And the problem is that on the political side of things, I saw some of the opposite stuff. And sometimes it needs to be that way. I think it's good for somebody, let's say, with that youth ministry, Christian psychology background, to at least reach out to, let's say, a homosexual. Okay, and so they can befriend them, meet them on those grounds, and kind of work out stuff. But eventually, you have to be salt and light. You have to move from point A to point B. And the big shocker is that you cannot get there without the soul winning. Okay? If you soul win, then you can change the culture. If you won their souls, you can change the cultures. If you don't win the soul, there's no point. Okay? He who winneth souls is wise. It's either Proverbs 14 or 11. Read both chapters. Read the whole thing. But basically, there is that thing, because what happens is that if we just reach the culture and then we become like the culture, well, then the world can get in us and the world can destroy us. That's when you got guys like Joshua Harris. Joshua Harris is really a focal point of youth ministry. I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Oh, it sounded so conservative. Oh, it's great, blah, blah, blah. And then, 15 years later, he's apologizing nationally. Year after that, he loses faith, and within a couple months, he divorces his wife. So that's the whole thing, you know. It's a Trojan horse. It's the enemy working within, and that's what you basically get out of the emergent church culture. You know, it's just the emergent church was this youth ministry culture that kind of devolved again. Okay, so those guys who were playing video games, either they got along with somebody's program over the right, or what happened? Well, and honestly, some of these like super duper youth ministers are now pastors. But yeah, they're pastors now, you know. Well, then what are they going to do if they didn't, get along with the program? Well, they played more video games, and then they just fell into heresy. And so that's what's happened a lot. You know, when I was a youth minister, there was a guy, Blue something or whatever, but they would send us these things about, the newest dynamic youth ministry. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And one of their main speakers was a guy named Rob Bell. 5 or 6 years later, Rob Bell comes out as a universalist. Yay! Why? Because he's trained to be disgusted by Christianity. He's trained with the mindset that Christianity is the problem. So, if Christianity is the problem, then it's never going to be the answer. So, you've already given up already. And as I said, when we deal with traditionalism, the problem with traditionalism is that in the past, there were liberals back then too. Even legalists are really a form of liberalism, just like, far right-wingers are usually a form of socialist. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with, is that, just like it's all big government, it's all just getting away from the Bible in some way or shape or form. And little things kind of got me out of that mentality. Obviously, my faith in the scripture was much deeper rooted. I wasn't born again from the youth ministry. I just happened to be, associated with it for all those cycles. And then I did like house church, which was kind of dealing with those 20-somethings. And at that point, I was a male, and so most of my audience was male. Now I'm in a little church, and most of my congregation is women. But basically, as I was going through that cycle, I then ended up, for a little while, a few years later, and I'd help out with a couple churches. I wouldn't be seriously involved, but I do a little bit of help out with the youth and the youth ministries and stuff like that. But nevertheless, I got back into youth ministry a few years ago, and it was at a very remote church that wasn't quite integrated with the other churches. And so we got away with some youth ministry that was more kind of what I had done to start off with. And, I got comfortable with it, and I was able to do stuff with the youth, and it was all fun and good. But there was some internal problems, and long story there. But then I started to look out into other churches, and I found out that the whole youth ministry situation was changing. Some of these interviews that I had with kids, I didn't really understand at the time. And now looking back and now seeing what we got, this vomit that we have right now I see where it's coming from. When the white kids are telling me about race. Or even before that, when the kids were telling me about how their English teacher had taught them politics. Okay. See, there was an indoctrination going on in the school systems. And I fought. I was a good boy. I fought it. I fought the Common Core curriculum and all that kind of stuff. Even made national headlines fighting that. But basically, it's like a sumo match. A lot of times the sumo match is decided before it even starts. Just in the stance and the psychology. That guy, I'm going to get you. I'm aimed. I'm ready. Boom. I can feel that doing football. There's you hit him. But, basically, that kind of turned off a light there for me. And youth ministry just became more closed. Here I was. I'd already been a youth minister twice. And the youth minister there told me they would take a year or two of examining me before I was able to even lead a Bible study with kids. And then, things like, I wrestled in high school, and I could just go to a friend who was coaching a wrestling team and just get in there and start teaching the kids and wrestle with them, and everything would be fine. Not anymore. All of a sudden, they're keeping all the doors locked, everybody's freaked out, and checking your records, and checking this, and checking that, and you'd have to be hired on, and it's going on with all this stuff. And I could see how the bars were locking. And, even when we talk about the lingo, it's really just psychological ways to box the younger generation so that they don't talk to the older generation. So that they're prisoners, okay? And basically trained up as a culture to focus things for, a new world order, all right? Oh no, a new world order would be crazy. Next thing you're going to tell us is they're going to shut down the government. Next thing you're going to tell us is that they're going to have people form crowds and foment violence and fight the cops. Next thing you're going to tell us is they're going to shut down the economy. Next thing, okay. So, anyhow, here we are, right? And so here you got this guy, and I don't know if he's really, set out to get your kids. I think he's making fun of the youth ministry. I think it's funny. Personally, I think he should do what friends of mine did, and they decided to do Christian comedy, and they went out to the comic stands, okay? They'd play at, secular clubs, and, that's when you take light out into darkness. And when you're out into a dark world, then yes, you have to compromise because you're out into that world, and then you give the gospel. But if you're in the church, then what are you doing? You're not bringing light to the church. No, you're bringing darkness to the church. And so what this guy is doing, because as I said, James White, he'd probably be complaining about the message, but he didn't seem to be too passionate about it. He was more passionate about the KJV. Okay, he was more passionate about getting all these other translations, some that he worked on and worked for and made a lot of money off of. He was more into that system, okay? But, yeah, at the end of the day, it's really just pointing to the fact that this thing has failed. When I was in youth ministry classes, one of the statistics they kept on going on was that 91 or 92% of youth ministry fails. That once those kids graduate, they leave the church, and they don't come back unless they have kids. If that is the ongoing statistic, and hey, he was telling me that in the middle of our cultural revival, okay, in the Bush years, right? Then we know it just doesn't work. And it's not that we can't minister to youth. It's that our culture needs to be a biblical culture. We have to have a biblical church culture, because our church is born again people. And therefore, when it comes to the kingdom, our kingdom is not of this world. And yet, our Savior does deserve obedience. And so, when you think of the Beatitudes, we should aim that. Our ethics should be aimed at. And the kingdom ought to spread light amongst the regenerate. And the regenerate should be the body of the church. And if not, we got to fix that problem. So that's kind of like the skinny on that. And, be a light into the world means your light shines before all men. Being salt and light, if the salt loses saltiness, what's the use? So a lot of this stuff is kind of what's the use? I mean, right now we're trying to reach this Gen Z. The problem is that whatever this new culture is, it's just puking and vomiting because it's inbred. Alright, it's not, it's just degenerated and rehashed. And just bleh. Okay? I mean, in my generation, they were like, rap is crap. But I would still listen to rap. And then, Eminem was all out there, and I didn't think he was, the greatest music to listen to. I don't, listen to it on a regular basis anymore. Most rap you, listen to for a month, and then it's done, Never to be re-rapped again, But, basically, I knew he was good at it, And he came out there, and he's just this mumble rap is garbage. So, what my generation thought was garbage is calling this generation garbage. And even then, I mean, you keep on going back in time. You go back to the 50s, it was American classical. Okay, you had multiple instruments and nuances and ups and downs and beats and, even the stuff that was kind of wild or oh man, you're blasting that jazz, and now it's the super, nuanced stuff. So, this is kind of the problem. I mean, don't get me wrong, you put lipstick on a pig, but our society, our language, everything, it's not that it's evolving, because there is no evolution. So if there's not evolution, what is there? Okay? It is all decay. And so what do I want when it comes to youth? Sure, they can learn how to communicate, okay, and they can dab it or whatever, but, once you communicate, then you kind of give them better words, okay? You give them the better Bible, for starters. Just saying. And, you get into a biblical frame of mind. You don't just have a life coach. You get trained up in the scriptures, trained up in wisdom. And make sure that it changes you so that you can change other people. And that's the problem. We had a great culture. And people want to sit around, oh, well, I heard lies about it on YouTube. Why don't you go run out in the street, oh, I guess you do now. I guess you do now. Why did the chicken cross the road? Because it was 2020. Catch you later.